I have smelled fear my whole life. In other men. In the sweat that comes off a body when the mind finally understands what the room already knows. I spent 20 years learning to read it, to use it, to keep it off myself like a coat I could take off at the door. That night at 3 in the morning, in a hospital corridor that smelled of bleach and cold coffee and something underneath it that I did not want to name, I smelled it on myself for the first time in a very long time. The nurse found me by the window at the end of the hall. I was still in my work coat, the one with the grease worked so far into the seams that it would never come clean, and I must have looked like exactly what the town believed I was, a tired mechanic who had gotten a phone call no one ever wants. "Sir," she said, and she said it gently, the way you say a thing you have said too many times. "Your wife is stable, but the fractures are severe. The next few days matter." Through the glass I could see Laura, my wife of 19 years. There was a machine breathing for her, a slow mechanical sigh that did not match any rhythm a living person makes, and her right arm was wrapped and pinned and raised, and there was a white bandage where her hair should have been, and her face, her stubborn, funny, beautiful face, was the color of the sheet. I did not go in yet. I could not. I stood at the glass, and I made myself breathe on a 4 count, the way I had once taught frightened young men to breathe before a door, and I waited for my hands to stop. A detective was already there. That was the first thing that was wrong, and I noticed it even through the fog, because a part of me never stops noticing. He was not asking questions. He was finishing. A man who is starting an investigation has a certain posture. A man who is closing one has another, and Detective Roy Keller had the second. "Mr. Sutton." He did not offer his hand. "Roy Keller. I'm sorry for your situation. I want to save you some grief here. No suspect, no witnesses. Looks like a single vehicle. These shoulder roads out by the ridge, they're bad at night. No lights, gravel. People misjudge them all the time." "Someone hit her," I said. My voice came out flat and even, and it surprised me, because inside I was not even. "There's no evidence of that," he said. "I know it's hard to hear. Sometimes an accident is just an accident." There was a second man in the corridor. I had clocked him when I came in and filed him, and now I looked at him properly. Good coat, soft hands. The kind of man who has never once in his life been the person who does the thing, only the person who arranges for it to be done. He came and sat 2 seats down from where my jacket lay on the vinyl bench, and he set a folded piece of paper on the seat between us, close enough to me that it was clearly meant for me, and far enough that he could pretend it was not. "On behalf of the family," he said, quiet, respectful, obscene. "For your trouble, there's a number there that should ease things. You sign, it's handled, and you can put your attention where it belongs, with her." I looked at the folded check. I did not touch it. I looked at his coat, in his hands, and his patient, practiced sympathy, and I understood that he had already decided who I was. A broken husband in a cheap coat in a small town. A problem the size of a signature. He was not wrong about the coat. For 6 years I had been a man named Ray, who fixed boat motors and waved at people from a folding chair outside his shop, and let the whole county believe that quiet meant simple. I had built that man on purpose. I had wanted him. I had earned him. Standing in that hallway, with a machine breathing for my wife on the other side of the glass, and a bribe cooling on the seat beside me, the mechanic went very still. And underneath him, the man I had spent 6 years putting to sleep, the man who used to command a SEAL team, opened his eyes and looked around the room and started, without any drama at all, to count exits. I did not shout at Keller. I did not touch the check. I want you to notice that because it is the whole story in miniature. Every instinct a grieving man has was screaming at me to grab that soft-handed lawyer by his good coat, or to put Keller through the window, or to simply weep. And any of those would have felt like something. And all of them would have been exactly what the room expected and could absorb. A grieving husband who breaks down is a Tuesday. They have a form for it. They had, quite literally, brought the form. So I did the one thing they had no plan for. I went quiet. I picked up my jacket from the bench, left the check exactly where it lay, thanked the nurse in a steady voice, and walked to the elevator like a man accepting the worst. Keller watched me go with the relaxed posture of a man who has closed a file. He thought he had watched me surrender. What he had actually watched was a target acquisition. I had his name, his face, his posture, the lawyer's face, the shape of the offer, and the single most important piece of information in the entire building, which was that they were confident. Confidence is a gift a careful enemy gives you. It means they are not watching their own back because they cannot imagine they need to. Before I tell you the rest, let me say the one thing I'm going to ask you for, and then I will not ask again. If stories like this one matter to you, hit the like button, subscribe for more stories about betrayal and what people do about it, and leave a comment telling me your city or your country. That is the only time you will hear from me until the end. They thought they had buried a case that night. What they had actually done, though not one of them knew it yet, was brief a target. Let me back up. You cannot understand what I did unless you understand the man they thought they were buying and the small, deliberate life he had built. I am a simple man now, or at least that is the costume I wear, and I wore it so well and for so long that some mornings I almost believed it myself. My shop sits at the edge of Harlan Ford, a river town that is exactly as small as it sounds, on a gravel lot with a hand-painted sign that reads Sutton Marine Repair and a coffee can of pens by the register that customers steal and return and steal again. I fix outboards and inboards and the occasional lawnmower that a man is too proud to take to the hardware store. I am good at it. There is an honesty to a machine. It is broken or it is not. And if you are patient and you listen, it will always, eventually, tell you the truth about itself. The week before, I had spent an afternoon rebuilding a carburetor for a retired school teacher named Gus, who paid me in tomatoes and a 40-minute report on his neighbor's fence dispute. That was a good day. That is what I had wanted my life to be. A man who is owed nothing and owes nothing, whose biggest problem is a fence he does not have to care about. We had found Harlan Ford almost by accident 6 years before, on a slow drive with no destination, the kind of drive you take when you have just handed back a career and do not yet know who you are without it. Laura had made me pull over at a bend in the river where the light came off the water in a way that made her go quiet, and she had looked at the little town on the far bank, the boat shop with the for sale sign leaning in the weeds, the church spire, the diner, and she had said, "That one, that's where the quiet is." I bought the shop the next week. I did not know the first thing about running a business. I knew how to take a broken thing apart, understand it, and put it back together better than I found it, and it turned out that is most of what a boat shop is. The first year I fixed things for free just to learn the town. By the second year, I had a reputation as the fella who would come out in the rain and never overcharge you. By the third year, I was furniture, the way a good quiet man becomes furniture in a small place, present and trusted and completely unexamined. That was the whole point. In my old life, being unexamined was something you fought and bled to achieve. Here I got it, just by being kind and boring, and I loved it more than I can tell you. The town liked Ray. That is a different thing from knowing him, and I had made very sure it stayed a different thing. A man who has done the work I did comes home with two choices. He can leave the door open, stay in it, keep the network warm, keep the weapon that he became oiled and ready and part of him. Some men need that. I understood them. Or he can close the door, seal it, and teach himself to love the quiet on the other side of it. I chose the second one. I chose it the way you choose to set down something heavy you have carried so long you forgot it was optional. Laura was the quiet I wanted. Everything else was just the box I put away so I could have her. She taught art at the middle school. She could make a room of 13-year-olds care about a bowl of fruit, which is a harder tactical problem than most of the ones they gave me in uniform. She was funny in a dry, sideways way that took people a minute to catch. She was stubborn in the specific way of someone who has decided that being gentle is a choice and not a weakness, which is a thing I have believed my whole life and never once been able to say out loud as well as she lived it. We had one kitchen ritual. She cooked badly and cheerfully, and I fixed whatever she had done to the food while she talked, and somewhere in there was the whole marriage. One evening that week, she stopped mid-sentence and looked at me. "You went somewhere just now," she said. "Just checking the perimeter," I said, which was our joke, and she laughed, and neither of us said the thing we both half knew, which was that it had once not been a joke at all. We did not have children. I will tell you that plainly because it matters to the story. We tried once, years ago in San Diego, and we lost the pregnancy late enough that it had a shape and a due date, and a name we never used again. And something in both of us decided, without a single conversation, that we would not try to survive that twice. So we chose each other, all the way, with nothing held back for anyone else. And that is a particular kind of marriage. Laura was not part of my family. Laura was my family, the whole of it, the only person on the earth I belonged to. I need you to understand that before you understand what the truck did, because when they ran her down, they did not hurt a member of my family. They came for the entire thing at once. That is the marriage the costume was built to protect. Not a house, not a town, not a reputation. Her. The quiet was just the wall I put around the one person I had left. There was a footlocker on a high shelf in the garage, behind the paint cans under a tarp. I had not opened it in 6 years. Inside it was the other man. His uniform, his medals, a coin, a folded flag from a funeral I still dream about, a phone I kept charged out of a habit I could not explain to myself, plugging it in every few months like tending a grave. I told myself I would never need what was in that box again. I believed it for 6 years. The costume only works until the day something reaches through it and puts its hand on the one thing you built the whole disguise to protect. The morning after the hospital, I went out to the shoulder road while the light was still gray, and I read the scene the way I used to read ground. It took me 90 seconds to know they were lying. There were 2 sets of skid marks, not one. The first set was a hard break. The second set, the important one, showed a vehicle that had stopped, reversed, and gone again. You do not reverse by accident on a dark road. You reverse when you are making sure. There was safety glass in the gravel that had been kicked toward the ditch, not photographed, not bagged. 20 years of reading the aftermath of violence, and I can tell you, there is a grammar to a scene. The same way there is a grammar to a report. And this scene had been made to say a sentence it did not mean. A woman was standing at the edge of the road when I straightened up. 50s, apron under her coat, the tired competence of someone who has waited a lot of tables. Cora Nunes. She ran the counter at the diner in town. "You're her husband," she said. Not a question. "I am." She looked back down the road toward town, then at me, and lowered her voice even though there was no one for a mile. It was the Callaway truck, the black one, the new one. The boy drives it. I saw it. I took a picture of the plate before the deputy came and told everybody to go home and stop, that they had it handled. She swallowed. "Everybody saw it, mister. And then by lunch, everybody had unseen it. That's how it works here." I asked her gently to keep that picture somewhere safe and not to tell anyone she had it. She nodded like a woman who already knew she had said too much. I crouched there a long time, longer than I needed to, because the operator in me had woken up at the sight of the reversing marks and would not go back to sleep. I photographed the skid patterns with my phone, and the glass, and the gouge in the soft shoulder where a heavy vehicle had backed hard enough to dig in. None of it was evidence in a legal sense, not yet, taken by a grieving husband with no chain of custody. But it was a map of the lie, and once you can see the shape of a lie, you can see the shape of the truth it is standing on top of. Cora told me something else before she hurried back to her shift. She said the deputy who had waved everyone off, who had told the gathered morning crowd that the department had it handled and there was nothing to see, had not written anything down. No notebook, no names. A deputy at a scene who takes no names is not doing his job badly. He is doing a different job well. At the police station, I asked for the report. Sergeant Phil Doran slid a single page across the counter without looking up from his phone. "That's what there is," he said. "Move along. Nothing here for you." I stood there and I read the single page in front of him, slowly, the way you make a man wait. He did not like it. There is a certain kind of small authority that cannot stand to be looked at closely, and Doran had it. He shifted. He told me again to move along. I asked him politely who had authorized closing an open injury investigation in 9 hours. He told me the detective did. I asked to speak to the detective. He told me the detective was busy. I thanked him and I left, and I filed away the exact register of his discomfort, because a man who is comfortable with a lie does not fidget, and Phil Doran had fidgeted the entire time. He was not the architect of any of this. He was a brick, and he was already cracked, and I marked him in my mind as the first one that would move. 1 page. The case was stamped closed 9 hours after my wife went under a truck. Detective Roy Keller's name was on it, and clipped behind it was a supplemental note from the county coroner, a man named Vernon Tate, describing Laura's injuries as, and I'm quoting the exact word, consistent with a fall. I have read 100 after-action reports written by men who were trying to hide something. You learn the tells, passive voice where there should be a subject, precision about the irrelevant and vagueness about the wound, a conclusion that arrives before the evidence could possibly have supported it. This report had every tell. A skull fracture and a shattered wrist and tissue damage the coroner himself would have to know does not come from a fall, described in the careful, boneless language of a man writing what he was told to write. Then, 2 days later, a friend at the credit union mentioned something to me over the counter. The way people mention things in a town this size, not knowing they are handing you a live round. 3 wire transfers. All the same night. All near 2 in the morning, hours after the crash. All out of a Callaway holding account. He did not say where they landed. He did not have to. He just gave me a strange look and said the timing was funny. A bribe has a signature, the same as a shooter does. Money that moves at 2 in the morning, hours after a woman is run down and a case is closed, is not a coincidence. It is a confession that simply has not been read out loud yet. I stood on the sidewalk outside that credit union, and I understood the whole shape of the thing. The way you understand a piece of ground the second you finally see it from the high side. The wall around the Callaways was not brick. It was money on one side and badges on the other, and holding it all up in the middle, the plain fear that everyone in Harlan Ford had of the same family. That is a strong wall. It will stop a grieving husband cold. But I had spent a career learning that a wall built out of what people are afraid of has a specific weakness. It only stands as long as the fear does. And fear, unlike brick, can be taken apart one frightened man at a time. That night, I went out to the garage and I moved the paint cans and I took down the footlocker. It is a strange thing to open a box you sealed against yourself. The dress blues were exactly where I had folded them. There was the coin a man had pressed into my hand in a place I'm not allowed to name, and there was the folded flag from Jesse Maddox's funeral, and I will not turn his memory into a prop, so I will only say he was 19 and I was his officer and I made a call under fire, and I have paid for it every day since. That is the reason I went small. Not because I was tired of the work, because the work had taught me that a single decision made in the dark, made in a hurry, made in grief, can take a life that was not mine to spend, and that no amount of being right afterward gives it back. Restraint for me is not softness. It is the most expensive lesson I have ever been taught, and I paid for it with a boy's life, and I was not about to throw that lesson away in a parking lot for the satisfaction of my own 2 hands. I will tell you only the shape of it, because the details belong to Jesse and to the men who were there. There was a night, a long time ago, in a place with no good options, where I had a decision to make in about 4 seconds with bad information, and I made the aggressive one, the decisive one, the one every instinct I had been trained into scream for. And it was wrong. Not wrong the way a coin toss is wrong. Wrong in a way that ended a 19-year-old who had trusted me to be smarter than my own adrenaline. I have replayed those 4 seconds 10,000 times. I have built a whole life out of the single conclusion I drew from them, which is that the moment you most want to act is the exact moment you are least qualified to. The one is the warning. When your hands are itching and your heart is loud and the answer seems obvious and violent, that is precisely when you stop and you breathe and you make yourself slow, because that feeling has already cost you more than you can afford once. That is what I carried into my truck outside the shop that night. Not just grief. A rule written in the most permanent ink there is. Understand the man they were dealing with because they never bothered to. I did not come up the easy way. I enlisted at 20, went through the pipeline, and served as an enlisted operator for years before anyone ever called me sir. I learned the job from the bottom, in the mud, doing the actual work, which meant that when they finally commissioned me and I climbed high enough to command a whole SEAL team, I already knew every place a plan could hide a lie, because I had been the man at the sharp end of a lot of plans built by people who had never been there. I did not trust rage. Rage is loud, and it is stupid, and it gets people killed. I trusted process. I trusted the slow, patient assembly of truth until it becomes too heavy for anyone to lift off you. At the bottom of the locker was the phone. I had kept it charged for 6 years, plugging it in every few months, and I had never once turned it on. I turned it on now. It took its time waking up, like it was surprised to be alive. When it finished, there was exactly one name I wanted: Marcus Pratt, Gunner, my old team chief, the man who had stood at my shoulder through more bad nights than I can count, and who now, in his own quiet retirement, ran investigations for a private security firm and was, without any exaggeration, one of the most dangerous, careful men I've ever known. He answered on the second ring at 11 o'clock at night, like he had been waiting 6 years for the call. "Ray Sutton," he said. "This phone only turns on for one reason." "Gunner." My throat worked. "Someone hurt Laura. Bad. And the people who are supposed to fix it got paid not to." I closed my eyes. "I need you to keep me from doing the wrong smart thing." There was a silence, and in it I heard him already moving, already pulling a legal pad toward himself, because that is who he is. "Okay," he said. "First, breathe. You taught me that, so do it. Second, you are not going to do the wrong smart thing, because you are going to send me everything, and we are going to work this like a target package, not a grudge. A grudge gets you a cell next to theirs. A package gets them the cell, and you the porch. You understand me?" "I understand you." "Say it back. Package, not a grudge." "Good. Now start at the beginning and leave nothing out." So I did. I told him about the road and the reversing marks and the glass kicked into the ditch. I told him about Cora and her photograph and the deputy who took no names. I told him about the single page and the fidgeting sergeant and the coroner's report that described a fall a body cannot suffer. I told him about the 3 wires at 2 in the morning. I laid it out flat and complete in the old briefing cadence. And I heard Gunner's pen moving the whole time, and when I finished, there was a pause. And then he said the thing that told me I was not alone anymore. "Okay," he said, "this is a package, a real one. This is not a grieving man seeing shapes in the dark. But listen to me, brother, because I am going to say it once and then trust you to be who you are. The fastest way to lose this is to touch it with the wrong hands. You do not confront the boy. You do not lean on a witness. You do not so much as key a car door. You build it, you hand it up, and you let the size of it do the work. You have done this 100 times. Do it one more time, except this time the objective is a courtroom, not a compound. Can you be that man right now, with your wife where she is?" I looked through the garage window at the dark yard, and I thought about it honestly, because he deserved an honest answer, and so did Laura. "I can be that man," I said. "She asked me to be. That's the only reason I can." I had spent 6 years forgetting how to be dangerous. Sitting on the cold garage floor with that phone against my ear, it came back in about 4 minutes. Not the anger, the other thing. The stillness. The way the world stops being a blur of pain and becomes a diagram, with nodes and links, and somewhere in it, always a seam. By the next morning, my kitchen table was not a kitchen table anymore. It was an operations board. I did it the way I had been trained to do it, because the training is a comfort when nothing else is. 3x5 cards, a link chart drawn in pencil so I could redraw it as it grew. At the top, the trigger, Trent Calloway, 24 years old, a young man who had been handed a truck and a name, and the lifelong understanding that neither of them could ever really cost him anything. Below him, the money, his father, Victor Calloway, who had built half of New Harlan Ford and owned the paper on the other half. And spread across the bottom, the buried case, Chief Ed Marsh, Detective Roy Keller, Sergeant Phil Duran, and Coroner Vernon Tate. The count came to 6, if you counted the boy who did it and the father who paid, and I did count them, because a target package is honest arithmetic or it is nothing. I treated my 3 threads as one rope. Cora's photograph of the plate. The coroner's report that described a fall a body cannot suffer, and the 3-wire transfers that had moved at 2 in the morning. Any one of them, alone, was a grieving man's theory. Braided together with a clean chain of custody, they were a rope you could hang a county on. I began to watch. This is the part people misunderstand about the work. It is almost never the dramatic thing. It is patience. I sat in my truck at the far end of the marina lot in the evenings, a mechanic on his break with a thermos, and I watched routine. Which cruiser parked behind the Callaway office after hours, and how long it stayed. Who walked in the side door, and who used the front. Whose habits said clean conscience, and whose said something else. I photographed nothing I was not allowed to photograph. I broke no law. You do not need to break a law to watch men break theirs. You only need patience, and I had a wife upstairs on a machine, and she made me the most patient man in the state. 3 evenings of that thermos and that patience taught me more than a month of asking questions would have. I learned that Detective Roy Keller drove to the marina office on Tuesday and Friday nights and stayed exactly long enough to be handed something and leave. I learned that Chief Ed Marsh never went near the place, which told me he was smart, that he kept his distance and let the money come to him through others, which is the behavior of a man who has done this before and expects to do it again. I learned that Sergeant Phil Doran drank alone at a bar 2 blocks from the station and complained to anyone who would listen that he was tired, which is the single most useful thing a target can be. A tired man wants, more than anything, to stop carrying the thing that is making him tired. I did not approach him. Not yet. You do not pick fruit before it is ready to fall. You just note the branch. And I built the board. Every night after the hospital, I came home to that kitchen table, and I moved the cards, and I redrew the pencil lines, and I made the picture more true. I wrote nothing I could not prove. I theorized in my head, and I recorded only facts on the cards, because a target folder that mixes what you know with what you feel is a folder that gets people hurt. Fact, 3 wires, 1 account, 1 night. Fact, 1 photograph, 1 plate, 1 timestamp. Fact, 1 report describing an impossibility. Around those hard facts, the soft ones arranged themselves, and the shape they made was not a theory. It was a machine, and machines, as I have told you, will always eventually tell you the truth about themselves if you are patient enough to listen. Gunner called on the 3rd night. I found you a door, he said. There's an agent. Federal. Public corruption. Works out of the field office 2 states over. Renata Ford. Her brother served with a guy you'll remember. That's how I know she's real and she's clean. If you bring her a chain of custody that holds, she can move on it. Warrants, the whole apparatus. The kind of people who cannot be bought by a marina developer in a river town. But Ray, listen to me. She is not going to touch a vigilante. The second this smells like a man taking the law into his own hands, she has to walk away, and she should. So which are you? I looked out the windshield at the dark water, and I thought about the boy in the truck and the easy, ugly thing I could do in a single night, and I set it down. Tell her I'm the guy who wants it to stick, I said. Renata Ford called me herself the next evening. She had a low, careful voice, and she did not waste a word. And within about 2 minutes, I understood why Gunner trusted her. She did not promise me anything. She promised me the opposite. She told me all the ways this could fail. She told me that public corruption cases are the hardest cases there are, because you are asking one part of the government to arrest another part, and the second part fights back with everything it has, and it has a great deal. She told me that if I had planted so much as a single piece of evidence, or leaned on a single witness, or laid a hand on a single one of these men, she would find it, and it would poison the whole case, and the Callaways would walk and I would fall. And then she told me the thing that made me trust her back. But if what you're telling me is real, she said, and it's clean, then these are exactly the people the law is supposed to be for. Not to protect, to answer to. Send me the folder, Mr. Sutton. Let's see what you've got. I sent her the folder. And then I did the hardest part of any operation, the part they never show, which is waiting while someone else moves and trusting the plan you built more than the fear in your own chest. For the first time since I had stood at that glass, I was not angry. Anger is weather. It comes and it goes and it changes nothing. I was something colder and more useful than angry. I was aimed. They must have felt the ground shift, even if they could not see me, because that week they started to push. It began with Cora. 2 days after I asked her to keep that photograph safe, a county inspector she had never seen before appeared at the diner and wrote her up for a code violation on a hood vent that had passed every inspection for 15 years. That afternoon, a man from the Callaway Management Company happened to stop in for pie and mentioned warmly how much the family valued good tenants and how leases came up for renewal and how he certainly hoped nothing complicated Cora's. She called me that night nearly in tears, ready to say she had imagined the whole thing, ready to take it all back. I did not push her. That is the mistake they wanted me to make. To lean on her the way they were leaning on her. To make her feel squeezed from both sides until she broke toward whoever squeezed hardest. Instead, I told her the truest thing I knew. Cora, you are not the only copy anymore. I already moved what matters to people they cannot reach, so you do not have to be brave. You can tell them whatever keeps your lease. It will not change a thing because it is already out of this town. I heard her start to cry, differently this time, out of relief. You did the right thing once. That is enough. I will carry it from here. Then they came for me, which I had been counting on because a man reveals himself when he thinks he is the one applying the pressure. Chief Ed Marsh drove out to my shop personally. He was friendly the way a knife is clean. He leaned against the door frame and admired an engine I had open on the bench and talked about the weather and the river, and then he got to it. Ray, I've known grief, he said. It makes a man imagine things, see patterns that aren't there, chase ghosts. I'd hate to watch you imagine yourself right into a corner you can't back out of. Harlan Ford is a good town for a man who keeps his head down and tends his own. He smiled. You've always been a keep your head down kind of fella. Don't go changing on me now. I wiped my hands on a rag and I gave him exactly the man he had come to see. Tired, beaten, a little afraid. I let my shoulders round and I looked at the floor and I said something about just wanting to take care of my wife. And I watched the satisfaction settle over him like he had solved me. He left believing he had turned me off with a word. Letting a dangerous man believe he has already won is one of the cheapest and most powerful things you will ever do. There was a second visit to the shop 2 days later, and this one was not friendly at all. Someone came in the night and put a brick through the front window of Sutton Marine Repair and painted a single word on my door that I will not repeat and slashed 2 of the tires on my truck. It was meant to frighten me, and I understood the message, and I also understood something they did not mean to tell me, which was that they were afraid. Men who have truly won do not throw bricks. They throw bricks when the quiet mechanic has not signed the check and they cannot understand why, and it is starting to make them nervous. I swept up the glass. I photographed the door and the tires for a file that was growing by the day. And I felt, underneath the anger, a small cold satisfaction because a nervous enemy makes mistakes, and I needed them to make a few. I did not report the vandalism to the Harlan Ford police, of course. That would have been like reporting a burglary to the burglar. I reported it instead, in a quiet phone call, to a woman 2 states away who was building a very different kind of file, and she told me to leave everything exactly as it was and photographed, because intimidation of a witness is its own federal charge, and I had just handed her another one. The last push was the one that told me exactly how little they understood. Victor Callaway himself came to the hospital. He arrived on Laura's floor with an armful of flowers and a lawyer half a step behind him, and he performed sympathy for the nurses, shaking hands, murmuring about the tragedy, about how this town takes care of its own. He wanted to be seen being kind. He wanted the record to show a generous man grieving a terrible accident. I was at the far end of the hall in my work coat, holding 2 cups of bad coffee, and he walked right past me. His eyes slid over me and found nothing worth stopping for. A maintenance man, a nobody. He did not give me a second look, and I made sure I did not give him a face to remember. He had never once wondered who my wife was married to. In a whole life of buying his way past every consequence, That one unasked question was going to cost him everything he owned. Every reasonable person in my life told me to stop. The chief told me. My neighbors told me, kindly, in the way people tell you to accept a thing they are relieved is not happening to them. Even a part of me, the part that had worked so hard to build the quiet, told me to take the settlement and put my whole self into Laura's recovery and let the rest go. But reasonable is a luxury. It belongs to people the system actually protects. When the system has already sold you out at 2 in the morning for the price of 3 wire transfers, reasonable is just the name they give the thing they want you to do, which is nothing. On the 9th day, Laura woke up, not all the way, not the way the movies do it, sitting up with a clear head and a clever line. She surfaced in pieces over an afternoon, and there was a long hour where she did not know where she was, and that hour cost me something I will not describe. But near evening, her eyes found me and stayed, and they were hers, my Laura, in there, tired and frightened and absolutely herself. Her left hand, the good one, closed around mine with more strength than I expected. "Ray," she whispered. Her voice was sandpaper. "You have your face on." "What face is that?" I said. "The one from the box." She wet her lips. "I always knew about the box. I never needed you to open it. I married the man who didn't have to." Her eyes filled and did not spill. "Whatever you're doing, whatever you're about to do, come back the man I married, not the one in the box. Promise me." I want you to understand what that did to me. For 6 years I had believed I was protecting her from a truth she did not know. And she had known the whole time, and she had chosen the quiet version of me not out of ignorance, but on purpose, the way you choose to let a hard thing rest. She was not asking me to be weak. She was asking me not to be lost. "I promise," I said, and I meant it, and keeping that promise turned out to be the hardest tactical problem of my life, because that same night I sat in my truck outside Trent Calloway's house. It was a big new house on the good side of the water, all glass and money, and his black truck sat in the drive with a fresh dent hammered out of the front quarter panel, and inside, behind a lit window, was a 24-year-old who had run my wife down on a dark road and reversed to be sure, and then gone home to sleep in a bed his father paid for. I sat there a long time. I am not going to lie to you and tell you the thought was not there. It was right there, whole and detailed, the way these things always are for a man trained to think them. It would have been easy. It would have felt for about 1 hour like justice. And it would have been the parking lot. It would have been a life spent, in the dark, in a hurry, in grief, exactly the way I had spent one before. It would have made me the thing I had hunted my whole career. And it would have handed the Callaways the story they could actually survive, the grieving lunatic who snapped, and it would have buried the truth even deeper than 3 wires at 2 in the morning ever could. One frightened kid in the dark is revenge. The machine that taught him he was untouchable, taken apart in the light where everyone has to watch, is justice. My wife had asked me for the second one before she even knew I had a choice to make. I started the truck and I drove away. I sat in a parking lot on the other side of town for an hour after that, shaking, because deciding not to do a thing your whole body is built to do costs you something real, and I want to be honest about that. Restraint is not calm. Restraint is a war you fight in silence, alone, in the dark, with no one to see you win it. I won it that night by a very thin margin, and I won it because a woman in a hospital bed had asked me to, and because a 19-year-old had already paid for the lesson so that I would not have to learn it a second time. I did not stop being angry that night. I stopped being a man with a grudge and became a man with a deadline, which is a far more dangerous thing to be, and far quieter. Here is how you take apart a wall made of fear. You do not hit it. You find the one brick that is already cracked, and you make it safer for that brick to move than to stay, and then you do it again and again, and the wall does not fall so much as it discovers it was never really a wall. Gunner's firm gave me a forensic accountant, a patient woman who worked pro bono when Gunner asked because Gunner had once carried her cousin off a mountain. She took the credit union tip, which was only a rumor, and turned it into a map, using nothing but records that a subpoena could later reproduce cleanly so that the chain would hold in a courtroom. The 3 wires that moved at 2 in the morning had left the Callaway holding account and arrived within the hour in 3 places: an account belonging to Chief Ed Marsh, an account belonging to Sergeant Phil Doran, and an account belonging to Coroner Vernon Tate. The amounts were almost equal. The timing was almost identical. It was, in the language of my old work, a signature so clean it was practically a signed confession. Cora's photograph, with its untouched metadata, put the Callaway truck on that road at that minute. And a young deputy, one of the ones whose conscience had been eating him alive since that night, came forward when he understood the wall was cracking and produced something extraordinary. Photographs he had taken on his own phone of 6 original witness statements before they were, in the official record, made to disappear. 6 people, names, times, the same black truck, the same reversing lights, statements that the closed case swore did not exist. There was one more piece, and it came from the tired man at the bar. I did not squeeze Phil Doran. I did something harder and slower. I let it be known through the young deputy that the wall was coming down, that the FBI was already in the wires, that the only question left for anyone still inside was whether they wanted to be a witness or a defendant. And then I waited. 3 days later, Phil Doran walked into the field office on his own 2 feet with a lawyer and traded everything he knew for a chance to not spend the rest of his life paying for the worst decision he ever made at a bar. A cracked brick, moving on its own, the way I had known it would the first day it fidgeted at that counter. His statement tied the money to the men by name. It was the keystone, and over the top of all of it lay Vernon Tate's report, describing as a fall and injury that no fall produces, a document that did not just fail to help the Callaways, but actively convicted them, because its lie was so specific it could only have been written to serve a purpose. I want to be honest with you about what this stretch was like, because the movies lie about it. It was not thrilling. It was 6 weeks of the most disciplined patience of my life, sitting next to a hospital bed by day and building a case by night, refusing 100 times over the easier, angrier thing. There were nights I wanted to burn it all down, and there were nights I wanted to simply take the check and disappear with Laura to somewhere the Callaways had never heard of. The reason I did neither was sitting in a rehab bed learning to squeeze a softball with a rebuilt hand. And every time the want got loud, I remembered 4 seconds from a long time ago, and I let the want be a warning instead of an order. I assembled it the way I had assembled 100 target folders, not to satisfy myself, to be handed to someone with the authority to act, in a form so complete and so clean that acting on it was easier than not. Renata Ford flew in on a gray morning, and we met in a diner 3 towns over, not Cora's, and she read for 40 minutes without speaking while her coffee went cold. She was younger than her voice on the phone, and she had eyes that did not miss much. When she finished, she squared the pages, set her hand flat on top of them, and looked at me. "You built this like a case," she said, "not like a grudge." "I had a good teacher," I said, "and a promise to keep. You understand that if you'd broken one law getting any of this, I'd have to throw all of it out, and you with it." "I know exactly how much law I did not break," I said. "It kept me up nights." She almost smiled. Then she gathered the folder into her bag and stood, and she said the sentence I had been building toward for weeks, in a flat voice that was better than any drama. "Go home to your wife, Commander. Let me go to work." It landed 11 days after the crash, in the early morning, the way these things should, quiet and total. It was not my hand, and it was not local badges that could be bought. It was the FBI and the state police, people who had never heard of the Callaway Marina and did not care who golfed with whom. I was not there. I was on purpose at the hospital, sitting next to Laura, because I did not want a single frame of this to have my shadow in it. But a town this small, you hear it happen. Phones start ringing before dawn and do not stop. Chief Ed Marsh was arrested at his home on charges of bribery and obstruction and conspiracy. Detective Roy Keller, who had closed my wife's case in 9 hours, was arrested in the same hour. Sergeant Phil Doran, who had told me to move along. Vernon Tate, who had described a fall. Trent Callaway was charged with a hit and run and with leaving the scene, and this time there was no page to make it disappear because the case did not live in Harlan Ford anymore. It lived in a federal building 2 states away in a folder no local money could reach. I heard the first of it from a nurse. I was in the chair by Laura's bed at 6:15 in the morning, half asleep, when a young aide came in to check a line and could not keep it in, whispering that the whole station was surrounded, that the chief was in handcuffs on his own lawn, that her cousin had seen it. Laura's eyes were open. She looked at me for a long moment, reading my face the way she has always been able to, and she did not ask me if I had done it. She already knew. She just tightened her good hand on mine and closed her eyes again, and let out a breath she had been holding, I think, for 6 weeks. And Victor Calloway, the man who had never once wondered who I was, woke up to find his permit suspended, his holding accounts frozen, and a federal audit opening every deal he had greased for 20 years. Because when you pay 4 public officials to bury a crime, you do not just buy a conspiracy, you hand investigators a thread that runs through everything you have ever touched. They pulled that thread for months. Every contract that had ever moved a little too smoothly through Harlan Ford's permit office, every inspection that had passed when it should not have, every competitor who had mysteriously withdrawn a bid, all of it began to unravel at once, because that is what happens to an empire built on the assumption that no one will ever check. Someone finally checked. I did one thing myself, only one. When it was done, when the arrests were made and it was safe and lawful to do so, I drove to the marina office and I walked in, unarmed, in my work coat, past a receptionist too stunned by the morning to stop me, and I stood in the doorway of Victor Calloway's office while he stared at a phone that would not stop ringing with news he could not buy his way out of. He looked up. He still did not know me. And then, slowly, he did. The maintenance man from the hospital hall, the mechanic, the nobody. And I watched the understanding arrive that the nobody had been the one all along. "You wired money to bury my wife," I said. I did not raise my voice. I have never had to. "You never once asked who she was married to. She is married to the man who spent his life learning how to take apart people exactly like you, and who is going to sit in a courtroom and watch your name read out loud, every count of it, until there is nothing of you left but the record." That was all. No blow, no threat, just the fact, set down on his desk like a folded check. I turned around and I walked out into the morning, and I left him alone with the sound of his empire finding out it had never been solid, only unquestioned. I did not raise a hand to any of them. I raised the truth. And the truth, it turns out, is heavier than anything I could ever have done in the dark. Once one badge fell, the honest ones remembered they were allowed to be honest. That is the part no one tells you about a wall of fear. The people trapped inside it are mostly not villains. They are cowards, or they are tired, or they have families and mortgages and a very reasonable understanding of what happens to people who cross the Calloways. The young deputy with the photographs was not the only one. Once it was safe, once the chief was in a cell instead of a corner office, a dozen small consciences in Harlan Ford woke up at the same time. The state attorney general's office took over the department. They put in an outside administrator, a hard, decent woman who started reopening cases the moment she had the keys. And it turned out my wife's was not the first inconvenient truth that had died quietly on Roy Keller's desk. Other families, who had swallowed their own impossible reports and their own settlements, began to come forward. A whole town started remembering things it had made itself forget. There was a man named Curtis who came to my shop about a week after the arrests. His son had been beaten outside a bar the summer before by a group that included a Calloway cousin, and the case had gone the way mine almost went. Closed fast, no witnesses, a quiet suggestion that the family accept a little money and move on. Curtis had taken the money because he had 2 other kids and no way to fight a wall. He stood in my shop with his hat in his hands, and he could not look at me, and he said he was sorry, that he should have fought, that maybe if he had fought the summer before, then Laura would never have. I stopped him there. I told him the only person who owed anyone an apology was already in a federal cell, and that the reason his case was reopening now was partly because men like him had survived long enough to still be here to tell it. He shook my hand for a long time. That was the day I understood that the wall had not just been standing in front of me. It had been standing in front of a lot of people for a long time, and it had taught every one of them that they were alone. Bringing it down told them they never had been. Cora's lease was never touched again. The inspector who wrote her up was himself now a small line in a large federal file. Her diner filled up because a town that has been afraid for a long time develops a powerful hunger to sit together in the light and say out loud the thing everyone knew. People who had unseen the truck saw it again, for the record, under oath. The Callaway Marina sign came down in June. Not dramatically. A work crew simply unbolted it one afternoon while the audit ground on, and where it had been there was a rectangle of clean siding, brighter than the rest, like the ghost of a thing that had seemed permanent right up until the moment it was not. The cost to me was the costume. It was over. My name was in the paper, and behind my name came the rest of it, the record, the command, the 21 years, the parts I had spent 6 years keeping in a box. Men who had waved at me from their boats for years now looked at me differently at the gas station, and some of them wanted to shake my hand, and a few of them saluted, and I hated that a little, because I had built the whole quiet life precisely so that no one would ever do that again. But I found I did not miss the quiet as much as I had feared I would. The quiet had been a hiding place, and you do not really need a hiding place once you have stopped being ashamed of what you are hiding from. Laura came home in May. Recovery is not a montage. It is a long, unglamorous grind of small, specific victories, and it is the truest thing I have ever watched a person do. The skull healed faster than the wrist. The wrist was the war. Her right hand, the one she draws with, the one she taught 1,000 children to hold a brush with, had to be rebuilt with pins and then coaxed, millimeter by millimeter, back toward being hers. There were bad days. There was a morning she could not open a jar, and she stood at the counter and cried out of pure fury. And I knew better than to open it for her, so I just stood with her until she wanted to try again. That is the whole secret of loving someone through something like this. You do not fix it. You are not the mechanic here. You just refuse to leave, and you let them be furious, and you wait. She started painting left-handed while the right one healed. She was terrible at it, and she did it every single day, propping the canvas at an angle, laughing at the wobbling lines, and there was more courage in those bad left-handed paintings than in most of the things I have medals for. The therapist told us the wrist might never be all the way back. Some fine motor control, she said, may simply be gone. Laura listened to that, nodded politely, thanked the woman, and then in the car she looked out the window and said very evenly, "We'll see." That was all. We'll see. I had led men who could have taken a lesson from my wife on the subject of refusing to accept a briefing as the final word. She practiced her scales on that soft ball until her forearm cramped. She held a brush before she could really hold anything, and made a mark, and made another. And I watched a middle school art teacher run a rehabilitation program on herself, with more discipline than most operators I have known, and I fell in love with her all over again, in a quieter and more permanent way than the first time. There was an evening, maybe 6 weeks after she came home, when she finished a small painting with her right hand. It was a painting of the river at the bend where we had first seen the town, 6 years before, the light coming off the water the way it had the day she made me pull over. The lines were not perfect. The hand that made them had pins in it. It was the most beautiful thing I have ever owned, and it hangs in the hall now across from the dress blues, the two truest things about our life, facing each other across a narrow space. "There he is," she said one evening. She was at the kitchen table working her right hand around a soft ball the therapist had given her, and she was watching me hang something in the hall closet. It was the dress blues, in the open, where anyone could see them. I had decided I was done putting the man I am into a box. "I always knew you were in there," she said. "You married the quiet one on purpose," I said. "I married both of you." She smiled, and it was tired, and it was radiant. "I just let one of you rest. I'm glad he got his rest, Ray. He earned it, and I'm glad he woke up when I needed him." Her eyes went serious. "You kept your promise. You came back the man I married, not the one in the box." "The one in the box kept the promise for me," I said. "He's the reason I drove away that night." We sat on the porch that evening, the way we used to before any of it, the river going by the color of a nickel, her healing hand resting in mine, the pins in it a small, hard truth under the skin. The machine that had breathed for her was gone. The town was quieter than it had been in years, But it was a clean quiet now, an honest one, not the kind bought with 3 wires at 2 in the morning. I did not get my quiet town back the way it was. I traded it. I traded 6 years of pretending to be nobody for the sight of my wife's name cleared, and my wife's attacker charged, and a whole department of bought men answering, in the light, for what they did in the dark. I got my wife back. I would make that trade 1,000 times and never once feel the loss. That is the whole story. Almost. There is one more thing I want to say, and it is to you. I spent a career being told that the strongest thing a man can do is act, and there is truth in that. But the strongest thing I ever did was not the arrests, and it was not the folder, and it was not walking into that office to tell Victor Calloway the truth to his face. The strongest thing I ever did was sit in a truck outside a lit window, with every reason and every ability to do the ugly thing, and drive away, because the woman I love asked me to come back whole. Restraint is not the absence of strength. It is strength with its hand open instead of closed. So let me ask you something, and I mean it. I am not asking to be clever. If the people sworn to protect your family were the ones who buried the truth, and money had already closed the case before you even got to the hospital, how far would you go to reopen it? Would you have driven away from that dark house like I did? Or would you not have been able to? There is no wrong answer, and I am not sure my answer would be the same on a different night. Tell me in the comments. I read every single one, and on this story especially, I want to know. If this story meant something to you, take a second to like it and to subscribe. It genuinely helps these stories reach the people who need to hear them, and tell me what you want next. More military justice like this one. Quieter family drama, the healing without the reckoning, or something darker. Whatever you ask for, I will write it, so let me know. Until then, take care of the people you love, and never assume the quiet man in the cheap coat has nothing behind his eyes. We will see you in the next story.